You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Nice to meet you.
That's correct.
David Roemer. Okay. I'll start off with this, just to ask what's your background, educationally and.
Well, the important thing is that I went to a Jesuit college. I went to Fordham. I graduated in 1964. Then I got a PhD from NYU in physics.
Okay.
But I wasn't interested in becoming a scientist. I was interested in making money. I tried to become a businessman, but I wasn't good at it. And the best I could do was get a job as a high school teacher. But then when I retired from that, I became more interested in science and religion. I started reading and writing about science and religion. I have a number of websites about the Shroud of Turin, and I've published some papers about how we know God exists, things like that.
Yes, I saw something on the Shroud in looking around. I might come back to that and ask you, but we'll go more directly to maybe the purpose of why this interview was arranged in the first place, and that has to do with your recognition by Who's Who in America. This is a website and maybe more. Marquis, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes, it's a publication.
A publication. What can you tell me about how you got recognized by Marquis' Who's Who in America?
Well, I offered to give a lecture lesson on God's existence to Columbia University, to the chaplain, and if they just said no, that would have been the end of it. But they sent me a letter threatening me with a lawsuit if I contacted anyone else about it. So that gave me a cause of action, and I filed a freedom of speech lawsuit against them. And it was dismissed, but I complained about the dismissal, and that brought me to the attention of Marquis Who's Who. So in effect, I'm winning the lawsuit in the court of public opinion. And what makes my lawsuit good is that in freedom of speech lawsuits, the social value of what you want to say is important. And the social value of what I had to say is very important, because I was going to explain the concept of God and why we know God exists. And if a student at Columbia asked a professor at Columbia about this, the professor would refer them to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And they have 3 long entries on God's existence. But none of them are the correct ones, the ones that I learned going to a Jesuit college. So my offer of speech had a lot of social value.
So, understandable. Columbia is not a Jesuit college. So, what brought you to even inquire to them about speaking to their which students were these? Undergrad students?
No, I wrote the letter to the minister of Columbia. Even though it's a secular college, they still
have the chaplain on campus.
Chaplain, yeah.
Okay. And what inspired you to do that? Just an interest because it's nearby where you live. You're local.
Well, I want to share with people the reasons to believe in life after death and to believe in God. I learned it because I went to Fordham, but I was lucky to go to Fordham. If I went to Columbia, I wouldn't learn the correct concept of God and the reasons to believe in life after death.
But you had no reason to think the chaplain there would respond the way that he did. No. Evidently, he wasn't welcoming of your offer to speak. Okay, and his which led to, I presume it was a he, led to his some sort of cease and desist order, or why did he feel it was threatening of you in any way to go to a lawsuit?
It makes no sense. I didn't actually threaten me with a lawsuit. What he said was that they would consider it to be harassment if I contacted anyone else.
Oh, okay.
For example, I could have sent emails to all the heads of the department or to all the students at Columbia, one way or another. But they said if I did that, that would be harassment.
Yeah, but you don't see any real logical reason for how it got there so quickly.
Got where?
To the point where why object so strongly?
Yes, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense that a professor of philosophy doesn't understand the correct concept of God and the arguments for God's existence.
So you mentioned the Stanford Encyclopedia. That's a philosophical manual or general knowledge?
It's
has a section on philosophy, I take it.
It's on the internet. You can access it by looking at the internet, looking under the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So it has 31 entries on God's existence: the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, and the teleological argument. But they don't have the correct concept of God and the correct argument, the one that I learned going to a Jesuit college. So an analogy is that it's as if I sued Stanford Encyclopedia for slandering God, and I won the lawsuit.
Yeah. So, if you got to speak at Columbia, what would have been the argument? How would you make the case beyond those three arguments that are listed in the Stanford Encyclopedia?
Well, you would start with the mind-body problem, and the mind-body problem is, to understand the mind-body problem, you have to understand the difference between science, metaphysics, and philosophy. A scientific observation is that the sky is blue. A metaphysical observation is that I can move my hand about any way that I want. If I lose my hand in an accident, I still continue to exist. My hand is something I have. In philosophy, there are no observations. Philosophy is a method of inquiry above or about other methods. For example, if you ask what's the best way to do science, that's a philosophical question. So there are four solutions to the mind-body problem. The most irrational one is dualism. In Cartesian dualism, there's a spiritual little man inside the brain that controls the body, like a stagecoach driver controls a stagecoach. Then slightly less irrational, in my opinion, is materialism. The idea that the human being is a collection of molecules makes sort of sense, because a chimpanzee, it's reasonable to think that a chimpanzee is a collection of molecules, and it's reasonable to think that human beings evolved from chimpanzees. So if you combine those two ideas, you get the idea that a human being is a collection of molecules. But what is not irrational at all is idealism. Idealism was invented by Bishop Berkeley. He was sitting on a rock contemplating the universe, and he figured he existed because God created him. But then he said, well, why did God create the rock? The rock doesn't know it exists. And Berkeley reasoned that God created the rock so he would have something to sit on. But God has infinite power, so God could just as easily create the illusion that the rock exists as the rock itself. So idealism is a rational, intelligent idea. But the correct idea, the one I was taught at Fordham by Jesuits, is that it's a mystery. The mind-body problem is a mystery, with the understanding that there are no mysteries in science. In science, we have a tremendous track record of success. They didn't know why the sky was blue in the 19th century, but they figured it out in the 20th century. That's the way science works. It makes progress. But with questions that come from our ability to make ourselves the subject of our own knowledge, there is no track record of success. So the correct solution to the mind-body problem, the one I was taught, is that it's a mystery. And you can express this a number of ways. You can say that humans are embodied spirits or spirited bodies. And if you take a course in metaphysics, you learn about form and matter. And applied to humans, the form and matter is body and soul. And you learn that the human soul is spiritual. I mean, a lot of people think the human soul is spiritual by definition. And whether or not people have souls is a matter of opinion. But that's so ignorant and stupid that it boggles the mind. That a professor of philosophy would think such a thing.
So that doesn't strike me as particularly controversial, or even outside of the realm of ordinary traditional philosophy through the centuries. Why would that not appear in the Stanford Encyclopedia, or why would somebody at Columbia object to you sharing that point of view?
Well, that's But that's the fact. The fact is that you do not get the correct concept of God from the Columbia, from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and you not learn about the human soul from the Stanford Encyclopedia. And it's not only non-believers that are mistaken about God; it's also a lot of believers. For example, Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways aren't that good. You don't find the correct concept with Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. And this was pointed out by Etienne Gilson. He pointed out that it's the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas that lead you to God's existence, not the 5 ways.
Which, of course, he was trying to purposefully use Aristotle and non-religious categories, perhaps, and stay within the realm of philosophy.
Well, I don't
know. The purpose of his 5 ways, I don't know. I'm proposing that maybe he was intentionally limiting the scope of the proofs he was identifying in order that it would work for people outside of, Christian theology.
Well, that may be.
Yeah.
The important thing is that it's the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas, not the 5 ways, that gives you the correct concept of God and the arguments for God's existence.
So your lawsuit, however, is what brought you to the attention of Who's Who in America. Is that what you said?
That's right.
Yeah, which was a freedom of speech inquiry.
Yes.
But dismissed, you said? Rather,
yeah, it was dismissed by the judges.
Did they give any explanation?
Well, no, they just. I forget what the order said, but basically it was dismissed because they said there was no cause of action.
Okay. Well, that ended the lawsuit, but it brought you to the attention of Who's Who in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's important about the lawsuit isn't whether or not there is a cause of action, but the social value of what I was going to say. And as I already said, the social value comes from the fact that the only way the students at Columbia could learn about the concept of God and the argument for God's existence is by listening to me. So that's an incredible situation. It's incredible that professors of philosophy at secular universities don't understand why the human soul is spiritual and don't understand the concept of God.
Yeah, presumably this is common throughout the country, right? Maybe even the world, or certainly the Western world.
And it's true even among the people who believe in God. If you ask them what the concept of God is, they won't give you the correct concept.
Yeah. Troubling, in addition, of course, is that there's those who wish to even silence the discussion. Yeah. So, hence the freedom of speech lawsuit. Yeah. Well, where do you think this is going to go? Is there anywhere else we can present the case and make the argument?
Well, the important thing isn't the lawsuit; it's understanding the concept of God and why we know God exists. Most people think when you ask them what God is, they say God is the creator of the universe. This makes no sense at all. It's God is the creator of human beings. And the human beings are finite beings. And a finite being is a composition of essence and existence. So God is an act of existence without a limiting essence. And this is this concept of God makes sense. It can be contradicted. I mean, it's not the proof of God is based on the assumption or hope that the universe is intelligible, and the concept of God is contradictory. The idea of an infinite being is sort of contradictory. But it's an intelligent and persuasive argument for God's existence. That means it's possible that God exists, which means it's possible that there's 2 kinds of knowledge, reason and revelation. Another word for revelation is faith, and you can also call it wishful thinking. So the decision you have to make isn't whether or not God exists, but whether or not there is a life after death. Now, there's no evidence of life after death, but there are a large number of miracles and signs and reasons to believe in life after death. An example of a reason to believe is the resurrection of Jesus, or the historical Jesus. An example of a miracle would be the Shroud of Turin. No one can explain how the image got on the Shroud of Turin. And an example of a sign would be the fact that people who don't believe are such idiots or have character defects of one form or another. A good example of this is John Paul Sartre. Sartre was not an idiot about religion. He admitted that Jesus saved mankind from meaning. And he didn't say God didn't exist. He just said the concept of God was contradictory. So he understands religion. So the fact that he doesn't believe is an obstacle to faith. Maybe he doesn't believe because he's more rational than us, he's more knowledgeable, he's more intelligent. But that wasn't the case because Jean Paul Sartre was a communist. He admitted once that he praised Stalin when he knew that Stalin was a mass murderer. So his character defect is not the same as a character defect of a professor of philosophy at Columbia. A professor of philosophy of Columbia doesn't know why the human soul is spiritual and the correct concept of God. So that's his character defect. But John Paul Sartre's character defect was that he was a communist.
So an ideological, you called it an obstacle. You think despite his understanding of the contradiction within the concept of God, he still concluded that faith, well, would Sartre have argued that faith was unreasonable?
Well, yes, he didn't think faith was reasonable, but he admitted that Jesus saved mankind from meaning. He gave mankind a meaningful life because he taught us that our purpose in life is to get to heaven. And then he said man is a useless passion because there is no afterlife.
But he came to conclude that, you think, because of his communist point of view. So in other words, an ideological argument overwhelmed any sort of philosophical argument.
Well, it's hard to understand. It's an obstacle to faith if somebody knows all the reasons to believe and doesn't believe.
All right.
That's maybe it's because they're smarter than us, they know more than us, and they're more rational.
Well, you mentioned the Shroud. I'm going to take you in that direction since it seems like you've done some work on that. What's your interest in the Shroud of Turin?
Well, the Shroud has on it a mysterious image of Jesus, and we know it was Jesus because it has the lashings on the black and the marks from the crucifix and the stabbing on the side. And no one can explain how the image got there. A lot of Christians think that what happened was that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, and there was a burst of energy, and that energy discolored the fibers and gave us the image on the Shroud. But I don't agree with this. I think in the case of the resurrection of Jesus, that's an historical event, and you don't have to ask what caused the resurrection of Jesus because it happened so long ago. There's no way to figure it out. But in the case of the Shroud is a scientific fact. So we have a duty to come up with a theory that explains how the Shroud got there. And my theory is, the one that's supported by a number of people, is that it was created by Gnostics in the 2nd and 3rd century using a crucified victim and methods that have been lost to history. So it's still quite a miracle because no one can explain how the image got there. It's a reason to believe.
So, why would the Gnostic theory that you adhere to be more reasonable than that it is Christ Himself?
Well, I don't really. I just like it better. It's not. Well, it's more rational. It's more scientific. You can't prove that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. You know that the resurrection is an historical event, but I don't think you can prove that it happened with a burst of energy on the third day. And what happened was that the followers of Jesus disbanded in fear and disappointment after he was crucified, but then they renewed their fellowship and swore up and down that Jesus appeared to them. It's not just a story, it's an historical event because they passed that belief on to succeeding generations. They founded the Catholic Church, which gave us Western civilization.
As far as research on the Shroud is concerned, and I'm not well versed in it, but my understanding was that it for the longest time, or at least since it was carbon dated, maybe in the 1970s, there was, or even in the historical record, there isn't much discussion of the Shroud's existence until sometime in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's right.
Where would the time between the Gnostics in the 2nd or 3rd century? Where did the Shroud disappear to for the 800 or 1,000 years?
Well, that's a weakness of my theory, I guess. I can't explain that. I don't know.
And the carbon dating. So, a scientific question: what is the science behind your belief in the Shroud?
Well, I forget exactly what science says about the dating of it. But I have.
But we don't know scientifically how the image got there.
I have a quote from an atheist where they admit that they can't explain the image. They certainly reject the idea that it came from a burst of energy when Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, but they can't come up with any other explanation. And this isn't the religious people; these are non-believers that admit this.
I teach high school students theology, and they're fascinated by it. I don't have much to share with them along the lines, and it's not particularly important to our curriculum. But when the topic of the Shroud comes up, or the possibility of it being scientifically verified, or what is this artifact? It is something, and there are different theories revolving around it. But there's a great deal of interest in it, of course. Even amongst teenagers, So, well, I'll ask you now. What is it you're working on? Is there some focus to your work at this point? Are you writing or something?
Well, I'm sending out a lot of emails and faxes telling people about what happened with the being selected by Marquis who's who. And I also thought through another way of explaining why God exists. That would be geared to atheists, help atheists understand it. I haven't. I've written it up. I posted it on my websites.
So your response to the lawsuit, which was dismissed, but you're saying you're finding success in public opinion.
Right. I'm winning the lawsuit in the court of public opinion through Marquis who's who.
But you find most people are not just open to, but would favor the free discussion and exchange of ideas. So that as a matter of speech, not so much, again, the content is what matters to you, is that you share with people about, the proper best view of the existence of God.
Right. And it may scandalize people who believe in God to the idea that the concept of God is contradictory. Could scandalize people, and the idea that you can't actually prove that God exists might scandalize people. But as I said before, you don't need to make a decision about God's existence. What you have to decide is whether there's life after death, whether you pay for your sins when you die. And there are a large number of signs, miracles, and reasons to believe. Another example of a reason to believe is the is the Old Testament and the name God gave himself. When Moses asked God what his name was, God said, "I am who am, Yahweh." And it was Thomas Aquinas that shed light on that. Thomas Aquinas was the one who said that a human being is a composition of essence and existence, and God is a pure act of existence. In other words, that's why God knew to call himself Yahweh, I am who am. So that's, I don't consider it evidence of life after death, but I consider it a reason to believe in life after death. That's the other thing that people need to understand, is that the human mind is structured like the scientific method. At the lowest level, you have observations, which requires paying attention. Then the next level is the level of inquiry, where we ask questions about what we observe. We want to know the cause of things and the relationship between things and the unity between things. This requires intelligence, and extremely intelligent people invent theories to answer the questions. And this brings us to the third level, which is the level of reflective judgment. At this level, we gather the evidence and decide whether a theory is true or just probable. And the fourth level is deciding what to do with our bodies, which requires being responsible. So you only have evidence if you have an observation, a question, a theory, and you're gathering it. You only have evidence at the fourth level. So that's why the resurrection of Jesus is not evidence of life after death, but it's a reason to believe in life after death. And that's another conflict that comes up between religious people. A lot of people think that the resurrection of Jesus is evidence of life after death, and that it's rational to believe in life after death. But they admit that it doesn't prove it. So they talk about the leap of faith. But that's not my understanding. My understanding is that faith is a decision and a gift from God. So I think the Catholic Church teaches that we get the gift of faith, not the leap of faith. So I've decided to believe in life after death because of the resurrection of Shroud and so on, all the many reasons. And God is giving me the gift of faith.
How does the revelation of St. Paul factor into that in terms of resurrection? Does he not make the case that because Jesus rose, it is a promise of our own resurrection?
Well, sure. That's another reason to believe.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing about Paul's conversion was that he described Jesus as having a spiritual body. What that means is that he had a religious experience. So but God gave him the gift of faith. God made him believe Jesus was alive by giving him a religious experience. So in my case, I haven't had I had a little religious experience, not much. But in my case, it's a decision. I decided to believe in life after death because of all the miracle signs and reasons to believe. There's a huge number of them. I'm not an expert on all of them. All the ones I know about are the Shroud of Turin and the fact that the fact that people who don't believe are such idiots. If you ask a professor of philosophy at Harvard, Princeton, or Yale about the soul, they'll say the soul is spiritual by definition. Whether or not human beings have souls is a matter of opinion. And if you ask them about God, they'll say God is the creator of the universe. The universe is a collection of molecules. It's not a being. It's many beings. It's a mental being. The universe. The universe doesn't exist.
Okay. I appreciate your insights and your time. Is there anything that we didn't touch on, or something else you wanted to include or share?
No, I think I expressed all the things that I want to express.
Okay. Is it Dr. Roemer? Doctor of Physics? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, thank you very much for sharing your story, and I wish you great success moving forward. It sounds like you're well on the way to evangelizing with authentic experience of God's existence and how important that is for our world today.
I hope somebody writes about it besides me. Somebody else says these things.
We need all the help we can get. Okay. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Take care.
Same to you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.